Hello and welcome to another episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr. Thanks so much for joining, and thanks so much for listening to these little in-between episodes where we kind of recap a previous interview and kind of summarize some of those thoughts. And we also just kind of basically talk about the importance and the interesting elements that go into running a record label and the art and culture behind all that. How fun is this? If you haven't already, check out our free guide. You can get that at otherrecordlabels.com. And that's basically like this right now in a written PDF form that you can print off if you do that. I certainly do. Or you know, on your tablet, you can check that out. I want to summarize. I want to talk about my takeaways from an interview we did with Tyler Onderi he's from Father Daughter Records, but he is also a freelancing industry person. That's such a gross term, but you know what I mean. I loved this interview. This was so eye-opening. We talked about A&R, and today, right now, I want to talk about my takeaways. I have 5 of them from my interview with Tyler about A&R. I'm looking over my shoulder here at the computer because my printer doesn't work. Look at that connection there. I talked about printing things off, and now my printer doesn't work. Oh well. Anyway, so this was a really cool interview because we talked about A&R, and we talked about A&R as an art form. And I thought that was really interesting because A&R, artist and repertoire, is the art of finding new artists and working with those artists, developing those artists, signing those artists, and working together to release music. And obviously that is the core of the label. That's one of the pillars of running an indie record label or any record label. And I just think it's a really interesting thing, but it's one of those things that we kind of forget about, or we don't actually identify or talk about in too much detail. And so to be able to do that with Tyler, who's an expert in the area, has done so much in this space, was a really great thing. So 5 things that he said that I thought was really cool. And if you remember, the first one was, if you haven't already, by the way, go listen to this interview, but share your own discovery story with their music. That was a cool thing because basically what he was saying is when you email a band initially, or you message them, or you meet with them for coffee, that's your opportunity to not come off as this like arrogant, like cliche label person and play it cool like you're in a negotiation. But this is the time for you to show and to tell them how their music has made an impact on you. And I thought that was a really cool thing, because you do think of these like cliche A&R people who play it cool at the back of a venue with their arms crossed, pretending to look like they don't care. But in reality, like, we are fans of music, and we're reaching out to this person because or this band because we're a fan of their music. And so Tyler had mentioned that it's important to have that unique personal story that you can share with them and say, hey, this is where I heard your music. This is what it reminded me of. This is how it made me feel. And I think that's a really cool thing, as opposed to those emails that like I see artists get all the time that is like, hi, I'm so-and-so with this radio station with 50,000 listeners, and I discovered your fill in the blank, and my favorite song is, pick the first song they could find. And it's usually like there's a spelling mistake or there's something wrong. And so I think this is a cool thing to meet with an artist, to talk with an artist and say, hey, listen, this is the truth, and a specific truth as to why I'm a fan of your music. He talked also about looking past the data. That was something he had said, and I thought that is cool too, because I'm guilty of like discovering an artist and then going straight to their Spotify to see how many monthly listeners they have, or see how many streams they have. And if somebody has like 20 monthly listeners and less than 1,000 streams on every track, to me, it starts to like worry me a little bit, or I feel a little greedy if I go to their Spotify. They're relatively undiscovered, but for some reason, Spotify has put them on one of their playlists and they have like 50,000 monthly listeners, and it's like, oh, I could capitalize on this. I sometimes get that like little greedy capitalist thought. So I think the point is to ignore both those sides, is to say, don't get in there and be like, man, this person has tons of Instagram followers or tons of Twitter followers. They could make me and my other artists, popular. Or to say, this person just opened their Twitter account, they have 0 followers, or for some reason, nobody listened to their first EP on Spotify. I think Tyler was kind of saying, you know what? Let's put those aside and let's focus on the music and what you guys can do together as a relationship. That was pretty eye-opening. Number 3 is go to shows. That's his advice. I like to stay at home and watch Netflix, but some people do like to go to shows, I've heard. And so, but that is obviously a great way. And I think that is how you get that personal connection, is going to shows, going to more shows, hearing bands develop, maybe hearing a band develop over the course of a year, and seeing them a few times. And then going back to point number 1, you've got that connection. You have that connection where you can say, I have this discovery story because I saw you play your first show 12 months ago. And, this is my favorite song, and look how much you've developed. Number 4 is be a fan. He talked about this a lot, the art of fandom. And I mean, gosh, it's so true. And it really does speak to all the other previous things we were talking about, is that when you're a fan, data doesn't matter. When you're a fan, you have a discovery story. When you're a fan, you go to shows. So I love that. And really, for me, and we've talked about this with so many other people on this podcast, for me, it is a really special thing when there's an artist that I just am such a fan of their music. And I've had the privilege of working with 2 artists this past year where I've been a fan of theirs in other bands for like 10, well, maybe 8 or 9 years. And then to get to work with them, I could honestly say, listen, I'm a huge fan of your music. I would love to work with you. And so that's a great thing. The 5th thing was the most eye-opening, and gosh, I loved it so much. But he talked about change where you're looking. Go to different venues, go read different blogs. This was when we talked a little bit about diversity, about diversifying your roster, representing voices that aren't as common in the industry or haven't been systematically so favored and common in the industry. And when I asked him about that, his response was brilliant. Change where you're looking. And that's, oh man, you can't keep doing the same thing expecting a different result. And if I'm looking for a different genre or just different voices and different sounds, it's really important to move outside of my comfort zone, move outside of the same venue or the same couple of blogs or even the same couple of tags on Bandcamp, is to look in new areas. I thought that was a really great thing. If you haven't already, you've got to check out this interview. I think expanding on the concept of A&R, it's just such a regularly used term in this space of indie labels and major labels, that I think we kind of ignore it and we kind of just talk about that, we discovered a band or a band came to us through our friends. But I think there is something important about taking it a little bit more seriously. So make sure you check out that interview. And thanks so much for listening. You can get our little free guide that we put together where we've kind of taken a lot of the wisdom from our guests on the interviews, and they've actually taken some time and written some specific little articles for this. And you can get that in a free guide at otherrecordlabels.com. Thanks so much for listening. There's a Facebook group too that is really growing, and you can find out more about that through otherrecordlabels.com. Thanks for listening.